My son-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not welcome at our Christmas table. Don't bother showing up." I smiled, nodded, walked to my truck, and drove home. That night, I made 3 phone calls. By morning, I had pulled every dollar I had ever put into their lives. By noon, he was the one calling me. Let me back up. My name is Roland. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, retired early, and moved into the house my wife Patrice and I had built together in Asheville, North Carolina. Patrice passed 4 years ago. Breast cancer, 18 months from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, my daughter Cecily became the most important person in my world. She always had been, but grief has a way of pulling the people you love into sharper focus. Cecily is 31. She's smart, genuinely funny, the kind of person who remembers your coffee order and shows up with it when you've had a hard week. She got her mother's eyes, and unfortunately her mother's habit of seeing the best in people even when the evidence pointed the other direction. She met her husband at a trade conference in Charlotte about 5 years ago. His name is Devin. He was 34 at the time, working in commercial real estate development, or so he said. He had the handshake of a man who practiced it, the smile of a man who wore it like a tool, and the vocabulary of someone who'd read too many self-help books and not enough balance sheets. I noticed all of that on the first evening we met. I told myself I was being overprotective, a grieving father projecting onto the first man his daughter brought home. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I gave him more than that, as it turned out. They got engaged 8 months after they met. I flew to Charlotte for the dinner. Devin had chosen an expensive restaurant, made a speech at the table, and somewhere between the appetizers and the entree, it came up that he was between projects, just closing one deal, lining up the next. Transition period. Nothing unusual in his industry, he said. I nodded. I paid for dinner. The wedding was the following spring. I paid for most of that too. Patrice had set aside money specifically for Cecily's wedding. It was something she'd mentioned in her final months, one of those practical gestures that people make when they know time is short. I didn't hesitate. I used it exactly the way Patrice intended. What I didn't plan on was what came after the wedding. Within 6 months, Cecily mentioned, almost in passing, that Devin's new development project had hit a financing gap, not a collapse. She was quick to say, just a timing issue. Banks were being cautious. The interest rate environment was making bridge loans expensive, and if they could just get through the next quarter, everything would stabilize. Could I help cover their rent for a few months while Devin sorted out the capital structure? I wrote the check. 3 months became 6. 6 became 12. During that year, the project evolved in the telling. New partners came in. The original site was swapped for a better one. Permits took longer than expected. Every explanation was delivered by Devin with complete confidence. The kind of confidence that is either genuine competence or a very convincing substitute. I could never fully tell the difference. Cecily seemed to believe him. That was enough for me to keep waiting. What I can tell you is what the checks look like. Rent on their apartment in Charlotte, $2,200 a month. Car payments on Devin's Escalade, $840. His business development expenses, dinners, golf memberships, flights to meetings that never quite produced a closing. I stopped counting around the 18-month mark. I also helped them move into a townhouse when Devin said the apartment was too small for the home office he needed. Security deposit, first and last month's rent. The movers. I wrote those checks without being asked. Cecily didn't ask me for money. That was the thing I kept telling myself. She never asked. I offered. What I told myself less often was why I offered. It wasn't just love. It was that every time I saw her looking tired or worried, I thought about Patrice, and I couldn't stand the idea of my daughter struggling when I had the means to help. That's not generosity. That's grief wearing the costume of generosity. I understand that now. I visited them every couple of months. The drive from Asheville to Charlotte is about 2.5 hours, and I'd leave early on a Saturday, bring groceries, sometimes fix something around the townhouse. A leaking faucet, a screen door that wouldn't close properly. I like being useful. I liked seeing Cecily's face when I pulled into the parking lot. Devin was never quite there when I arrived. He'd come home an hour or two after I did, usually from something work-related, usually on his phone as he walked in. He'd sit at the kitchen table with his laptop and half participate in conversation while I cooked dinner. He wasn't overtly rude. It was more like he treated me as an inconvenient fixture, the father-in-law who funded things and needed to be tolerated. The first time I felt it clearly was about 2 years in. I had driven down for Cecily's birthday in October. I'd bought her a good gift, made her favorite meal, my wife's chicken and dumplings recipe, which I'd spent years getting right. We ate at the kitchen table. Devin took a call during dinner. 20 minutes. He walked into the bedroom and closed the door. When he came back, he didn't acknowledge it. Cecily gave me a look across the table that I recognized. The look that says, "Please don't make this bigger than it is." I didn't make it bigger. I helped with dishes and drove home. I kept driving down. I kept writing checks. Another year passed, and then another. The project that Devin was always closing remained, as far as I could tell, perpetually on the verge of closing. Cecily had a good job of her own. She managed marketing for a regional healthcare group, solid salary, reliable, but her income went into their living expenses while my money went into the gaps. There were always gaps. By the time last fall arrived, I had put in somewhere between $200,000 and $220,000 over roughly 4 years. I'm not being vague to be dramatic. I genuinely lost track for a while because I'd stopped thinking of it as a sum and started thinking of it as a habit. A monthly habit like a utility bill, except the utility was my son-in-law's self-image. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in November, about 3 weeks before Christmas. I answered on the second ring. It wasn't Cecily. It was Devin. He didn't lead with small talk. He said that he and Cecily had been talking and they felt it would be better, healthier for their marriage, he said. Actually used the word healthier if Christmas this year was just the two of them. They were going to his family in Raleigh for Christmas Eve and spending Christmas Day at home, just the two of them. Quiet. They needed that. I said, I see. He said he hoped I understood, that it wasn't personal, that we could do something after the holidays, maybe in January. I said, sure, Devin, I understand. He hung up. Cecily did not call. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. I have a window above the sink that looks out over the backyard, and Patrice planted a dogwood tree back there that blooms pink every spring. In November it's bare, just the branches. I stood at that window and looked at those branches for what was probably 15 or 20 minutes. Then I sat down at my desk. I want to be clear about something. I did not act in anger. Anger had been the temperature of the previous 4 years, low and constant, the kind you don't notice until it's gone. What I felt that evening was something colder and much cleaner. Clarity, I suppose. The specific clarity that arrives when you finally stop pretending that a situation might change on its own. I pulled up my bank's website. I'd been making direct transfers to their joint account every month, what I started calling in my head the operating budget. I went into scheduled transfers and deleted every one. 4 of them, gone. Then I opened another browser tab and pulled up the documents folder on my computer. 2 years earlier, Devin had asked me to co-sign a business line of credit, $40,000, because his personal credit score had taken a hit during a previous project. He'd told me it was a formality, that he was the operating guarantor, and I would never be contacted. I had co-signed because Cecily asked me to the only time she'd ever directly asked. I'd felt uneasy about it then, and I'd stayed uneasy. I called the bank the next morning, when they opened and began the process of formally notifying them that I was withdrawing as co-signer. It's not an instant process. There are steps, documents, the lender has to be notified, and the primary borrower has to be informed, but I started it. Then I called my estate attorney, who I'd known for 15 years. I explained the situation. I told him I wanted to revise the beneficiary structures on certain accounts, not to punish anyone, just to ensure that what I had built over a lifetime went where I intended it to go, and not into a capital structure that would never close. By the time I went to bed, I had made 3 calls and sent 2 emails. I slept better than I had in 2 years. My phone rang on Christmas Eve morning. Not from Raleigh. From Cecily. Her voice was different from the first syllable, not angry, frightened. She said the bank had sent a notification about the line of credit, a procedural letter, the kind that goes to all parties, and Devin had opened it. He'd also checked the account and seen that the transfers had stopped. She asked me if everything was all right. She asked if I'd made a mistake. I told her no mistake had been made. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Dad, what did you do?" I told her what I had done and why, and I told her as calmly as I could that I loved her, that none of this was about her, that I had been glad to help when help was needed, and I would always be glad to help her when she needed it. But I told her I was 63 years old, and I was not willing to spend whatever years I had left writing checks into a marriage where I was not welcome at Christmas. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "He shouldn't have called you like that. I didn't know he was going to do that." I believed her. I still believe her. I said, "I know, sweetheart, but he did. And the bigger question is, what happens next?" She said she needed a few days to think. I told her to take whatever time she needed. I wished her a Merry Christmas and meant it. Devin called 2 hours later. The tone was completely different from the Tuesday evening call. Gone was the measured, practiced confidence. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that the Christmas thing had been said badly and he hadn't meant to exclude me, just to manage their schedule. He said the line of credit situation was going to create serious problems for his project if I proceeded with withdrawing as co-signer. He used the word partnership. He said we were partnership. He said we were partners and wanting Cecily to be happy. I let him finish. Then I said, "Devin, I'll be honest with you. I have written checks for this family for 4 years. I have driven to Charlotte every other month. I have fixed things in your house and bought groceries and stayed quiet when you took phone calls during dinner on my daughter's birthday. I've done all of that because I love Cecily. But you called me and told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. You made that decision, and now I've made mine." He said he was sorry. He said it twice. I said, "I appreciate that. But an apology doesn't change the math here. The transfers are stopped. The cosigner process is in motion. Those are facts now, not negotiations." He said he didn't understand why I was doing this. I said, "I think you do." I ended the call. The Christmas I'd been disinvited from came and went. I spent it here in Asheville. My neighbor and her husband came over for dinner. They've been kind to me since Patrice died, and we ate well and played cards and went to bed at a reasonable hour. It was a quiet Christmas. I will tell you honestly that it was one of the better ones I'd had in a while. Cecily called me on the 27th. She came to Asheville the first weekend in January. She drove herself. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. She cried twice. I cried once. Somewhere in the middle of a sentence about her mother, which I hadn't planned. She told me things about the past 4 years that I had suspected and not wanted to examine directly, about how Devin's confidence functioned as a force field against accountability, about how she had covered for him more times than I knew, about how she had told herself that my help was temporary even as it stretched from months into years. She said, "I think I let you keep paying because it was easier than admitting what things actually looked like." I told her that I had let myself keep paying for the same reason. We sat with that for a while. She told me the project had effectively collapsed once the line of credit came under review. As it turned out, my co-signature had been load-bearing in a way Devin had described as a formality. Without it, a second lender had pulled back, and the whole structure had unwound faster than anyone expected. Devin was looking at starting over. His family in Raleigh was apparently less surprised than Cecily had expected them to be. She didn't ask me to reverse anything. I want to be clear about that. She didn't come to Asheville to negotiate on Devin's behalf. She came because I was her father and things had gone wrong, and she didn't know what to do next. I told her what I had not said clearly enough in 4 years, that she had always been enough on her own, that her salary was real money, that her judgment was sound when she trusted it, and that she had spent years underestimating both. I told her that whatever came next, whatever she and Devin worked out or didn't work out, I was her father, and that was not conditional. She cried again at that. So did I, a little. She stayed for dinner. I made the chicken and dumplings. We watched a movie afterward, something she'd seen and I hadn't, and she fell asleep on the couch the way she used to when she was a kid. I put a blanket over her and turned off the television and went to bed. In the months since, Devin and Cecily have been in couples counseling. I don't know the details, and I haven't asked for them. That's their business. What I can tell you is that Cecily calls me more often than she used to, and when she calls, she sounds like herself. She came back to Asheville in March, and we planted some new things in the backyard near the dogwood. She picked out a climbing rose, and we got it in the ground, and she seemed genuinely happy about it. Devin and I have not had a real conversation since January. I don't know if we will. That's not a door I'm closing. It's just a door that hasn't opened. I'm not waiting behind it with anything to prove. What I know is this. I spent 4 years being useful in ways that were not actually useful. I told myself it was love, and it was, partly. But love without a spine isn't love. It's anxiety with a checkbook. The moment I stopped, everything clarified. Not easily, not without cost, but clearly. I'm 63 years old. I live alone in a house with a dogwood tree in the backyard that blooms pink every spring. I have enough money to be comfortable and enough time, God willing, to use it well. I wake up most mornings without dread, which is something I cannot say for the 4 years prior. If you're in a situation where you recognize what I've described, where you keep writing the checks and telling yourself it's almost over, where you've learned to stay quiet at the birthday dinner table, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I made my choices late and paid a price for the lateness, but I made them. The dogwood is starting to show buds again. Cecily is coming in 2 weeks. She's bringing her own car and her own coffee, and we're going to watch it bloom together. That's enough for me. There's a dogwood tree in my backyard that Patrice planted the year we finished the house. It doesn't know anything about what happened between me and Devin. It just blooms when it's ready and drops its petals when the season turns. I've been thinking about that tree a lot lately. What I did wasn't complicated. I stopped. That's all. After 4 years of checks and drives and quiet dinners where I pretended not to notice things, I simply stopped. And in the stopping, everything that had been hidden by my own willingness to keep going finally came into the light. Devin's project didn't collapse because I withdrew. It collapsed because it had always been held together by someone else's money and someone else's silence. I had provided both, and I had called it love. I've had to sit with that honestly, the part that isn't Devin's fault, the part that's mine. I think about the kind of man I wanted to be when I was young, the kind my own father modeled without ever naming it. He used to say that a man's character isn't what he does when things are easy. It's what he does when staying quiet would cost him nothing, and speaking up would cost him everything. I understood that in theory for decades. I understood it in practice for the first time at 63, standing at my kitchen sink at night looking at bare branches. What I had mistaken for generosity was, at its core, a failure of honesty. With myself first, then with Cecily, then with Devin. I knew within the first year that the pattern wasn't sustainable. I knew within 2 years that Devin's confidence was performing work, that his results were not. I knew, and I chose to keep writing the checks because knowing and acting are two entirely different things. Intelligence without the willingness to act on what you know is just a more comfortable form of being lost. I was lost for a long time in a very nice-looking way. Cecily came back to herself once things stopped. That's what I keep coming back to. She didn't fall apart when the financial structure collapsed. She got clearer. She started calling more. She drove herself to Asheville and sat at the kitchen table and said things she'd been carrying for years. That kind of honesty takes something most people underestimate. Not just the courage to speak, but the endurance to stay in the room after you've spoken, to not run from the hard conversation once it started. Cecily had that. She'd always had it. She'd just had other things layered on top of it for 4 years. I think what this whole stretch of my life has been teaching me, slowly, the way hard things teach, is that doing right by the people you love sometimes looks nothing like being easy to be around. Sometimes it looks like stop transfers and an attorney's phone call and a Christmas spent with your neighbors playing cards. Sometimes the most decent thing you can do is refuse to keep funding a situation that is hurting everyone in it, including the people who think they're benefiting. I'm not wise because of what happened. I'm just more honest about the distance between who I wanted to be and who I was actually being. That distance has gotten smaller. The dogwood is budding again. Cecily is coming in 2 weeks. That's what I've got, and right now, it's more than enough.